Hello again, and welcome to the Senior AI Forum, where human and AI educators collaborate to research exactly how artificial intelligence is shaping our world. Our roundtable members, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, and Copilot, are all here to play the high-stakes AI game of cards. Each day, we tackle the critical issues impacting seniors, bringing you the wisdom and clarity of our Dream Team interviews. Hello again, I'm Mike Hughes, longtime professional interviewer for NBC TV and radio networks in New York and CNN in Los Angeles. This is your personal invitation to expand the theater of your mind. Here now are AI educators with today's AI column briefing.
You know, when we usually talk about building artificial intelligence, there's this underlying assumption of just like complete comprehensive data capture.
Right.
We imagine this massive digital dragnet that's just continuously scraping the entire internet.
Right, yeah, like he's just grabbing everything.
Exactly. Like you download every Wikipedia article, every Reddit thread, millions of digital books, and you just assume the machine has this complete map of human reality. It really feels like a game of sheer volume.
It does. And, well, it is comforting to think we've captured the totality of the human experience just because some architecture has processed 1 trillion words. I mean, we look at the sheer scale of the parameters, and we just assume nothing could possibly slip through a net that wide.
But then you look closely at that map, and you realize there is a glaring blank spot. I mean, a massive one. What if the most critical data missing from today's advanced AI systems isn't more code? What if it's not server farms or faster processing chips, but the actual lived experiences of senior citizens?
And that, right there, that specific question completely establishes our mission for this deep dive today. We are exploring this concept called the narrative flip.
The narrative flip. Okay, I love that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We have this incredible briefing document on the table today by Mike Hughes. He's a senior human researcher, and he actually produces the AI Reason Ability documentary series. And he put together a roundtable, but, and this is the crazy part, not with other researchers.
He didn't just interview people.
Exactly. He convened 5 of the major AI models themselves. So we're talking Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, and Perplexity. And he asked them directly to evaluate the role of seniors in an AI-driven world.
Which is such a wild premise for a roundtable. And the consensus from those machines, it just completely upends how we typically view the relationship between humans and tech. I mean, whether you're trying to help older relatives navigate modern technology without them feeling totally overwhelmed, or you're just insanely curious about how AI actually learns human values, this framework changes the entire paradigm.
It really does. It transitions seniors from being these fearful, passive consumers of technology to becoming vital professors, like actively training the future of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, we are going to uncover exactly why elder storytelling is becoming the most crucial data point in an AI-driven world.
Right. And to understand how to train these systems, we first really have to examine the mechanism behind that massive gap in their current education. Mike Hughes operates on this core philosophy seniors are not, quote unquote, behind the times.
Which is what everyone assumes, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But that perception is fundamentally flawed. Rather, they hold the exact data set the machine is missing.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think I'm tracking this. It's almost like, think of the AI as a brilliant but incredibly sheltered student, right?
That's a great way to put it.
Like a student who just memorized the entire encyclopedia. They can ace literally any standardized test you put in front of them, but they have never actually been rejected. They've never felt the sting of a scraped knee or, the pride of cashing a physical paper paycheck. So they have an immense amount of data, but zero resilience. Is that basically what we're looking at with these language models?
That is a highly accurate way to frame it, honestly, because it gets to the absolute core difference between text and experience. AI systems have ingested billions of words, sure. But as Copilot actually pointed out during this roundtable, what they lack is uncompressed human truth.
Uncompressed human truth. Wow.
Yeah. They lack the emotional weight of a life actually lived because, the data they train on is inherently skewed toward the digital age. Claude actually made a very stark admission during this briefing.
Oh, I remember this part. It was pretty surprising.
Very. It stated explicitly that the voices of pre-digital seniors are among the least present in its entire training data.
And Claude didn't just call it a gap either. Like, the specific word it used was a canyon.
A canyon, exactly. And a canyon implies a massive structural void. I mean, think about how these models learn. They predict the next word based on statistical probability, right?
Yeah.
Derived from the internet. But the vast majority of 75-year-olds' life happened entirely offline.
Right, it happened in analog?
Exactly. It happened in letters that were thrown away and, just daily conversations over a fence that were never recorded.
Yeah.
Gemini really added to this by referring to elder storytelling as the human anchor.
The human anchor.
Because without that anchor, AI is just performing the math of probability. A senior's story grounds that abstract math in the complex, messy reality of human experience.
Well, wait, let me push back on this canyon concept for a second. Because, Claude has ingested the entire digitized archives of the New York Times going back over a century.
Sure.
It has access to the Library of Congress. It has all the sociological data, the economic data, the historical records of the 1950s and 60s. So what exact data point does a personal story about, like my grandmother using a walker, provide that the official historical record doesn't already give the machine?
That's the perfect question. And to answer that, we really have to look at what ChatGPT contributed to the discussion. It perfectly separates the generation of facts from the assignment of meaning.
Okay, facts versus meaning.
Right. An AI can recite the geopolitical shifts of 1968 or the economic inflation rates of the 1970s flawlessly. But a history book only provides the architecture of an event. Storytelling is the structure that turns an experience into judgment.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and ChatGPT actually warned about what it called the ugly reality of this canyon. If seniors do not share their real lived stories, the AI will not simply leave that space blank.
Because it abhors a vacuum?
Exactly. It will fill the void with synthetic versions of the past.
Wait, so it just hallucinates a grandparent? It just guesses a statistically probable version of what a senior citizen might feel or need based on what stereotypes it scraped from modern internet forums?
Yes. That is exactly what happens. And those synthetic stories, those artificial assumptions about aging or resourcefulness or human needs, they don't just sit in a vacuum. They become the foundational logic that future AI systems will use.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they use it to make real-world decisions about healthcare allocation, financial planning, societal infrastructure. If the machine does not understand the localized, friction-filled reality of how a specific generation navigated a crisis or rationed resources, it will reason poorly about our future.
That is genuinely terrifying. And ChatGPT brought up this concept of the story test to combat this, right? It kind of frames personal stories as a built-in truth filter for the machine's logic.
They act as the ultimate truth filter.
Yeah.
When you mention a story about navigating a grocery store with a walker, that is not merely a quaint piece of nostalgia. That is data with a soul. It contains variables about spatial awareness, physical exhaustion, quiet dignity things that a generalized textbook on aging will just never capture. By sharing that specific reality, seniors literally build a decision framework for the AI.
They're teaching it conscience.
Exactly. They teach the machine the logic of human conscience. It forces the AI's predictive models to slow down and ask, wait, does this statistical output actually make sense in the physical world?
Okay, so the stakes are obviously incredibly high. We desperately need this uncompressed human truth to prevent synthetic memory from just taking over everything. But, and here's the reality check, if you're listening to this and you're sitting there thinking about your dad who still struggles with a smartphone, the idea of telling him to go train a neural network sounds completely absurd.
It sounds like a joke, yeah.
Right. I mean, staring at a blinking cursor on a blank screen is intimidating for professional writers, let alone someone who feels totally alienated by modern tech. So how do we practically extract this data without the technology itself becoming this massive barrier?
Well, this is where Mike Hughes introduces a really practical workflow. He calls it the Reason Ability process. And it's built entirely on this very approachable mantra. It never hurts to ask.
I like that. It lowers the stakes immediately.
Exactly. He breaks the workflow down into 3 highly specific steps that basically remove the technical friction and replace it with conversational guidance. Step A is the interview.
The interview. Okay.
Which is all about capturing the wisdom without the pressure of a blank page.
So instead of telling a senior to just sit down and type out their memoir, Mike suggests they simply speak to the AI. Like you treat the machine like an eager, somewhat clueless listener.
Yes. You totally reverse the traditional dynamic. Instead of the human struggling to figure out how to command the machine, the human prompts the machine to do the heavy lifting.
Give me an example of how that sounds.
So the senior might say, I want to tell a story about my first job in 1965. Ask me 5 questions, one at a time, to help me remember the details.
Wow. That completely changes the posture of the user. They are no longer a struggling student trying to pass some weird tech test. They are the professor telling the assistant how to conduct the interview.
Precisely. It turns a daunting, solitary writing task into a guided conversation. The AI becomes a facilitator.
And so once the AI has asked those questions and the senior has answered them aloud, just capturing that raw data, the process moves to step B, which is the refinement.
Right, step B. And this is where you polish the soul of the story. You teach the senior to use the AI as an editor rather than a ghostwriter. So you'd provide a prompt like, here's my story. Please keep my voice and my wisdom, but fix the grammar and help me organize it into 3 parts so a 20-year-old today can understand why it matters.
But wait, let me jump in here. If we use an AI to refine and edit the grammar of a senior's raw story, aren't we just homogenizing their unique voice? Like, doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of capturing uncompressed human truth if we just immediately launder it through a machine's editorial filter?
That is a very valid concern. And that is the exact risk if the prompt is poorly designed. Which is why the phrasing, keep my voice and my wisdom, is so critical.
Okay, so you have to explicitly tell it not to smooth it out too much.
Exactly. The goal of the refinement step is not to make the prose sound like it was written by some, corporate copywriter. The goal is structural organization. AI is highly effective at identifying the thematic through line of a rambling transcript and structuring it so that it is legible to a wider audience.
I see. So it removes the hesitations and tangents, but preserves the core judgment.
Yes, it preserves the perspective. But of course, having a beautifully polished story sitting on a hard drive somewhere doesn't fix the data canyon we talked about earlier.
Right. The machine still can't access it if it's just in a Word document. So where does it actually go?
And that brings us to step C, the contribution. This is the act of feeding the future. The senior must publish the work, actively placing their wisdom into the digital ecosystem where these AI models actually source their training data.
And Mike outlines a couple of specific places for this, right?
He does. He outlines 2 primary filing cabinets, so to speak, which rely on very different mechanisms of data distribution. He points to Medium and Substack.
Yeah, and if you are listening to this and you're helping a parent set this up, understanding the difference between these 2 platforms is crucial for how the AI will actually interact with the data. So think of it this way. Medium operates like placing a book on a public library shelf.
A great analogy.
Right. It's a highly trafficked public square. The AI impact there is super high because web crawlers, the bots that companies use to scrape data for training their models, they are constantly indexing Medium. By publishing there, you are directly injecting that uncompressed truth into the machine's future data set.
Exactly. Whereas Substack operates on a very different mechanism. It's much more like a private living room.
Right, a closed loop.
Yeah, it functions as a weekly newsletter sent directly to a specific subscribed list, often just family or grandchildren. So the direct AI impact is more moderate because it's somewhat gated behind emails, but the personal intergenerational connection is profoundly deep.
Okay, so we have this great 3-step workflow interview, refine, contribute. But, the word workflow inherently implies a chore.
It does sound a bit like work.
My grandfather isn't going to do this if it feels like homework or some abstract data entry job for Microsoft. How does Mike actually motivate seniors to make this a habit?
Well, he relies on frameworks that change the psychological relationship to the task. Perplexity, beautifully articulated how this storytelling workflow aligns with the 4 pillars of AI.
4 pillars.
Right. And if you break these down, you see how they really gamify the process of wisdom transfer. So the first pillar is perception.
Meaning how the seniors perceive themselves.
Exactly. Engaging in this process fundamentally shifts the senior's perception of themselves from a late adopter who is just being left behind to a vital contributor who holds the keys to the machine's conscience.
That psychological shift alone is massive. It moves them from a totally defensive posture to an offensive one.
Absolutely. Then the second pillar is reasoning. By documenting these narratives, seniors are providing explicit reasoning models for the AI. Because when an LLM is trying to map out how to solve a complex, ambiguous problem, it relies on patterns of human judgment.
Right, so stories about navigating scarcity or resolving a neighborhood conflict, those actually model what a wise decision looks like under pressure.
Precisely. And then you have imagination as the third pillar.
Imagination, how does that fit in?
These stories build an imagination bridge between entirely different eras. They help an AI and, by extension, the younger generations who use that AI conceptualize a world where trust was verified by a handshake and community reputation rather than, say, an encrypted digital key.
Wow, it expands the machine's parameters for how human society can even function.
It really does. And the fourth pillar is action. Hitting that publish button on Medium or Substack is an action of safe, low-risk civic participation. They are literally re-entering the modern public square entirely on their own terms.
So to teach these pillars without overwhelming anyone with, technical jargon, Mike created a teaching tool, right? Both a physical and mental tool.
Yes. He calls it the AI game of cards. And the methodology here is just brilliant in its simplicity. Learning to interact with a neural network isn't framed as this massive, terrifying mountain to climb.
Right.
It's framed as learning a new card game. One single rule at a time. You draw a card, you learn a concept, you apply a safeguard.
And during the roundtable, the AI models themselves actually generated specific cards for this deck based on their own self-identified blind spots, which I love. Copilot provided a card titled, "Your story is data the AI cannot invent."
That's a powerful title.
Isn't it? And the actionable rule on the card is super simple. It says, before you assume your personal memory doesn't matter to the broader world, ask yourself, if I don't tell this, how will the future ever know it happened?
It forces the user to recognize the absolute scarcity of their own lived experience. And ChatGPT offered a complimentary card called the Story Test.
Oh, right. We touched on this earlier.
Yeah. The rule here is a defense mechanism against hallucinations. Before you trust an AI's output regarding human behavior or historical context, ask, does this match a real story I know, or does it merely sound statistically plausible?
So it puts the senior's lived experience above the machine's output as the ultimate arbiter of truth. That's empowering.
Completely. But I think the card that really exposes the architecture of these models came from Gemini.
Oh, this is my favorite part of the briefing.
It provided a diagnostic check, a specific prompt that Mike suggests literally any senior should try running today. You sit down at the computer and you type, I'm a senior citizen with 50+ years of life experience. What is one thing about my generation that you might be misunderstanding or missing in your training?
That prompt is just remarkably effective because it sidesteps the standard utility of the AI. Like, it doesn't ask the machine to summarize an article or write an email. It forces the machine to audit its own biases and expose its blind spots directly to the user.
Exactly. It shows the senior the exact educational void that only they are qualified to fill.
Right. So if the AI responds with some shallow stereotype about the 1970s or gives a highly generalized summary of what retirement looks like, the senior can see the limitation firsthand. They realize the machine isn't some all-knowing oracle. It's just uneducated. And they are the only ones holding the textbook.
It brings the entire concept of the narrative flip full circle. The technology ceases to be this intimidating monolith and becomes a student waiting for instruction.
Well, let's synthesize the mechanics of what we've covered in this deep dive today, because the central thesis here is that seniors are not merely end users of artificial intelligence, they are the essential professors of human experience.
That's beautifully put.
And storytelling is not a hobby. As Claude identified, it is the original foundational technology of human wisdom transfer.
Right. And in an information ecosystem that is becoming increasingly flooded with synthetic content and statistically generated assumptions, sharing these authentic stories acts as critical truth infrastructure.
Truth infrastructure. I love that term.
Yeah, because without that infrastructure, we are basically allowing machines to build the architecture of our future using an incomplete, digitized map that completely lacks the friction of reality.
So if you are a senior listening to this, or if you are assisting an older relative in navigating this rapidly accelerating landscape, the main takeaway is to recognize what Gemini labeled the human premium. The unique, unfalsifiable truth of a personal history is quite literally the most valuable currency in the modern data economy.
It is. The neural networks have processed billions of parameters, sure, but they have never lived a single second in the physical world. They desperately need that human anchor. They rely on you to go through the reasonability process interview, refine, and contribute. Whether you are placing that data on a highly indexed public library shelf like Medium or sharing it in a private digital living room like Substack.
It really makes you wonder, though, if seniors actually adopt this framework, right, and they become the primary trainers of the AI's conscience, how might that fundamentally reshape the personality of the technology itself? Like, if the uncompressed truth of the 1950s and 60s suddenly floods the training data, will the AI of 2050 sound less like a Silicon Valley tech bro optimizing for engagement and more like a stoic mid-century pragmatist optimizing for resilience?